Have you ever been on a long, exhausting flight where the cries of a child just wouldn't stop? What would you do? Get annoyed, complain, or sit in silence, enduring it? On a luxury flight, the young daughter of a powerful billionaire cried for hours on end. The wealthy father, a man who had once controlled billion-dollar deals, was powerless before his child's tears. The crew was frantic. Passengers were weary and irritated. No one could calm the little girl. And then, under the scornful stares of first class, a poor black boy stood up. With nothing but trembling hands and a brave heart, he stepped forward. What do you think? What could a poor child possibly do in a place filled with the world's most powerful? If it were you, would you shrink back in silence or step up and do the unthinkable? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about choice, about courage, and about how a single small act can change destiny not only for one child, but for everyone who witnessed it. If you believe that every act of kindness holds the power to change the world, then like, share, and subscribe and join me on this journey. The cry of a child can shake the entire space, and on that night flight, it became reality. The massive Boeing 777 departed New York just as the clock struck 11 p.m. Outside, the sky was pitch black, lit only by faint streaks of scattered clouds and distant stars. But inside the first-class cabin, where passengers had prepared for a long night's rest, a piercing sound tore through the silence, the relentless, desperate wails of a 6-month-old baby girl. Emma Wright, daughter of Alexander Wright, the tech billionaire whose name made all of Silicon Valley bow in respect. Yet now, Emma was nothing more than a fragile little child, flailing her arms, face flushed red, tears streaming endlessly. And the crying would not stop. 30 minutes, an hour, then 2. The sound persisted sometimes, whimpering, sometimes shrill, sometimes choked as if breathless. It wasn't just a baby's cry, it was like a haunting melody, looping endlessly, driving everyone to the brink. Men in elegant suits loosened their ties, frowning. Ladies in silk dresses sighed, raising hands to cover their ears. Some passengers, utterly fed up, slammed the call button for flight attendants, demanding seat changes. But the flight was full. No one could move. At the center of it all, Alexander Wright cradled Emma in his arms, sweat beading across his forehead. The man who once signed billion-dollar contracts, who had rewritten the rules of the tech world, now looked like nothing more than a clumsy, trembling father. He walked the aisle in circles, rocking her the way he had seen in movies. He pulled out a milk bottle, pressing it gently to her tiny lips, but Emma shook her head violently, screaming louder. He activated the smart doll, the newest product of his own empire, a doll that could sing, glow softly, and detect emotions. But Emma only flung it aside. Technology, once his pride, was now useless. Flight attendants came forward. One cautiously offered a mild sedative. Another brought pillows, blankets, and even small tricks taught in newborn care training. None of it worked. The entire cabin sank into a shared sense of helplessness. A middle-aged man, face twisted in annoyance, muttered loudly enough for many to hear, a billionaire who can buy an island but can't quiet a baby. How ironic. An elderly woman shook her head, leaning toward her neighbor. I paid thousands for a peaceful sleep. And now it's hell. Alexander heard everything. He tried to ignore it, but each word cut into him like a blade. He was used to deference, to admiration, but here every gaze upon him carried not respect, but blame, irritation, even pity. Beside his ear, the crying never ceased. It drilled into his eardrums, sank into his chest, and stabbed at his heart. For a fleeting moment, he felt like a failure, a man who had conquered business empires, now defeated in the simplest role of all, a father. What did I do wrong? Is it because I was too busy to ever learn how to hold her properly? If Sarah were still alive, maybe everything would be different. The whisper echoed in his mind, sharp with pain. Sarah, his wife, had died in an accident just after Emma was born. He thought he could manage fatherhood alone, but now he realized he had never been prepared. Emma cried until her voice grew hoarse, hiccuping between sobs. Alexander held her tighter, murmuring, "Don't cry. Sweetheart, Daddy's here." But Emma kept struggling. Each fresh burst of cries sent a shudder through the cabin. The air grew heavy, as though everyone waited for the ordeal to end. But it didn't. The transatlantic flight still had nearly 7 hours to go. No one could imagine surviving if this continued. Alexander slumped into his seat, exhausted. His head bowed low, eyes red, Emma still wailing in his arms. Never had he felt so fragile, a man of immense power, now reduced to someone small and lost before his daughter's tears. And at that very moment, in the economy cabin behind a thin black teenager, lifted his head. Malik Johnson, 15 years old. His eyes flickered with something part hesitation, part determination. No one knew. But within minutes, this unknown boy would do something no one could have believed. The cries still echoed through the first-class cabin, relentless as a crack that could not be sealed. With each passing minute, Alexander grew more exhausted. He tried everything. He pressed the call button, asking to be moved somewhere more private, but the flight was full. He stepped into the lavatory, hoping the confined quiet might soothe Emma, but her wails only bounced off the tiny walls, amplifying his panic. Back at his seat, he laid Emma across his lap, patting her gently in rhythm. For one fleeting second she paused, then burst out crying even louder. Alexander pulled out the latest iPad, played a Mozart piece once praised by studies as good for infants. But instead of calming, Emma screamed so loudly that a few passengers behind them grimaced and snapped, "Can't you do something?" Alexander inhaled sharply, his chest burning. All his life, he had been respected, never once confronted so directly with reproach. But now he had no rebuttal. He had no answer. Emma's cheeks burned red, tears streaming endlessly, her tiny hands clawing as though to escape her father's arms. Her cries were no longer just sounds. They had become a mirror, reflecting Alexander's deepest helplessness. He remembered the years before, when Sarah, his wife, was still alive. She had once cradled Emma as a newborn in her arms. Back then, Alexander buried himself in contracts, closed-door summits, and all-night meetings. He would often say, "You take care of her. Sarah, I need to focus on the company." And Sarah would smile, never blaming him. But now, thinking back, Alexander saw clearly how foolish he had been. Sarah was gone, taken by a car accident right before his eyes. Emma was far too young to remember her mother, and Alexander, her only remaining parent, had never learned how to soothe his own daughter to sleep. A memory surged the last time Sarah held Emma. She had sung a soft lullaby, just a few lines, and Emma had drifted into slumber. Alexander had only glanced at that moment, then turned back to his phone. Now. He ached to hear that song again, but it was lost forever. He gripped the armrest tight, eyes stinging. A billionaire, a man who had spoken directly with presidents, couldn't even recall a simple lullaby. The cabin divided into two moods. Some passengers showed open irritation. A woman in a blazing red evening gown whispered to her companion, "So irresponsible. If he can't care for his baby, he shouldn't have brought her on such a long flight." Her words cut deep, sending heat rushing to Alexander's face. He wanted to stand up, to shout, "I've done everything I can," but Emma's cries drowned out every thought. Yet there were also glimmers of compassion. An elderly man with silver hair, seated by the aisle, nodded gently as if to say, "Hang in there." "Son, I understand." But the sympathy only made Alexander's heart ache more. He looked down at Emma. Her little eyes were swollen, her mouth wide open, tears soaking through his shirt collar. Her tiny hand clutched his collar as if accusing him. "Why don't you understand me?" Daddy Alexander swallowed hard. Questions flooded his mind. Have I sacrificed too much? Are the contracts, the towers, the AI code all meaningless? If I cannot comfort my daughter right now, will the world remember me as a tech visionary, or only as a failed father? He looked around the cabin, the leather seats, the sparkling champagne glasses, the soft ambient lighting, all designed for ultimate luxury. Yet none of it could silence the cries of a child. In that moment, Alexander felt the world laughing at him. He remembered his boyhood in a small Ohio town, how he had once vowed to build a life where he would never feel powerless again. He had succeeded, becoming a billionaire, commanding thousands of employees. But fate had thrown him into this cruel irony, powerless before his daughter's tears. He closed his eyes, searching for peace. But all he heard was the crying, and within it, Sarah's voice. "Alex, sometimes a child doesn't need technology. She just needs to be held and understood." Alexander whispered, "Sarah, I was wrong." Emma's cries continued. They were no longer just an annoyance. They had become a pounding rhythm, breaking him down. He sank into his seat, eyes weary, hand trembling as it stroked his daughter's hair. For the first time in years, he truly felt small. Not before a boardroom, not before investors, but before a fragile little being, only a few pounds in weight, sobbing in his arms. The first-class cabin had become a strange stage at the center, a billionaire unraveling all around him, dozens of eyes, some scornful, some pitying. The air thickened, heavy with tension, and in the shadows of the economy cabin, Malik Johnson still sat quietly, watching. The 15-year-old boy heard every cry, saw every bead of sweat on Alexander's brow. His thin hands clenched the strap of his backpack. In his heart, something was stirring, an urge growing stronger by the second. It had been more than 3 hours, and Emma's cries still tore through the air. Alexander was drained, and the passengers looked ready to revolt. The atmosphere inside the plane was so heavy that even the faintest sigh rang sharp and clear. At the back of the economy cabin, a boy sat motionless. Malik Johnson, 15 years old, thin, shoulders slouched as if used to making himself small for the world. His faded t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and shoes frayed at the edges said everything about him. In his arms, he clutched a flimsy backpack, the meager sum of what he carried for this journey. Malik's eyes looked forward. He saw Alexander Wright, the powerful billionaire, holding a baby whose face was crimson from screaming, whose lips trembled blue from exhaustion. And in that moment, Malik's heart raced wildly. A voice rose inside his head. "You can't just sit here. You know how. You soothed Amira the same way." But another voice growled back, "Who do you think you are? This isn't Southside. This is first class, a world for the rich, a world you don't belong in. If you step up there, they'll laugh at you. They'll chase you away like a beggar." Malik squeezed his eyes shut. His heart was being torn in two directions. One toward fear, the dread of humiliation in front of strangers. The other toward urgency, the cries of Emma, the helpless eyes of a father the world revered, now brought to his knees. He thought of Amira, his little sister, those cold Chicago nights when she burned with fever and their mother worked late shifts. Malik would hold her close, humming the lullaby his mother used to sing. Slowly, Amira would fall asleep on his shoulder. Malik had learned how to be a parent at 8 years old. He knew what it felt like to cradle a trembling child. He knew how a soft song could reach somewhere deep inside a tiny heart. I can calm Emma, but what if I fail? What if they look at me with nothing but contempt? Malik's knuckles turned white around his backpack straps. The cries went on, sobs ragged and suffocating, filling the plane with a choking weight. Malik felt as though his own heart was weeping with her. He couldn't bear it anymore. He stood up. The sudden movement startled a few passengers in economy. There he was, a thin, ragged black boy, standing in the middle of a cabin, stretched taut with tension. An older woman beside him frowned. "Where do you think you're going?" Malik swallowed hard. His voice shook, but his eyes burned steady. I think I can help." The woman shook her head, half pity, half disbelief. But Malik had already begun to move. Step by step, he walked forward. The aisles seemed twice as long. Passengers whispered, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Some scoffed. What's he trying to do? What would a poor kid know? Others sneered that boy must be delusional. Malik heard every word. His heart pounded, his legs trembled, but he didn't stop. He knew if he turned back, he would regret it for the rest of his life. As he reached the boundary between economy and first class, a flight attendant blocked his way. Her voice was firm. "Sorry, you're not allowed in this section." Malik lifted his head, eyes shining, his voice strangely resolute. I can make the baby stop crying." The cabin froze for a beat. Emma's cries still rang out, echoing. But now, every gaze was fixed on Malik. A few passengers burst out laughing. A middle-aged man sneered, "A ragged boy thinks he can do what a billionaire cannot." A woman shook her head, "Absurd." But Malik didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He only stood tall and looked straight at Alexander. Alexander raised his head, eyes red, face drawn with exhaustion. At first, surprise flickered across his features. A poor boy, standing amidst the luxury. But then, in Malik's eyes, he saw something. Not arrogance, not curiosity, but pure sincerity. Alexander hesitated. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself, years ago when he had nothing but belief and courage. The air in the cabin grew tighter than ever. Passengers waited. The flight attendant stood uncertain, and Alexander wavered between doubt and hope. Malik drew in a deep breath. His body still trembled, but his choice was made. He would either be laughed at, or he would save a child. All eyes turned to him, a thin black boy in worn clothes, shoes frayed at the edges. His presence was like a crack in the flawless painting of first class. A man muttered, loud enough for many to hear, "What kind of joke is this?" A lady crossed her arms, her eyes skeptical. "A child, what could he possibly do?" Whispers rippled through the cabin. Some laughed under their breath, others frowned with irritation. Only Alexander sat motionless. He still held Emma, his face drained, his eyes bloodshot. When his gaze met Malik's, there was a moment of silence. In the boy, Alexander saw something he had long lost, the kind of courage that defied everything. Malik swallowed hard. His heart thundered, his palms slick with sweat. But he stepped closer, his voice trembling yet clear. May I try." The cabin seemed to stop breathing. A few passengers chuckled, but Alexander, utterly exhausted, gave a faint nod, not because he truly believed, but because he had nothing left to lose. Malik moved closer. Emma still screamed, her face flushed, her tiny fists flailing. Malik reached out, gently touching her small hand. For a moment, she kept crying. But then Malik began to hum a simple lullaby he once sang for Amira. And something extraordinary happened. His voice was untrained, uneven, even shaky at times, but it was sincere, tender, filled with warmth. Malik sang as though only he and the baby existed in the world. Emma slowly stopped hiccuping. Her sobs softened more. Her tiny hands grew still, and then, to everyone's astonishment, her eyelids fluttered closed. She drifted into sleep, breathing evenly. The first-class cabin went silent. Only the steady hum of the engines remained. Everyone stared, stunned. A passenger who had been grumbling since the start of the flight stammered, "Impossible." A woman covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. Even Alexander, who had once believed he held the entire world in his hands, now looked at this boy as if he had performed a miracle. His eyes filled with tears. He whispered, How did you do that?" Malik cradled Emma gently, still humming softly. He didn't answer at once. His gaze was focused, as if holding the most fragile treasure in the world. The silence stretched. Then finally, Malik looked up and said quietly, "I used to soothe my little sister like this. When she cried, I sang and she stopped. Maybe all she needed was to feel a real heart caring for her." Alexander froze. Those words, so simple, cut deeper than any reprimand. He, who had poured millions into child care technology, who believed anything could be bought, had forgotten the simplest truth, genuine love. The murmurs in the cabin faded. Passengers straightened in their seats, their eyes fixed on the boy. An elderly man with silver hair nodded, murmuring, "This boy, he's different." Malik sat there, Emma sleeping peacefully in his arms, still humming his hoarse lullaby. No one could have imagined that a poor boy, stepping out of the shadows of economy, could accomplish what adults' technology and luxury had all failed to do. Alexander reached out, his hand trembling as he rested it on Malik's shoulder. His voice broke, but he managed to say only one thing. "Thank you, son." At that moment, the passengers looked at one another. The skepticism had melted into awe, and on that night flight across the Atlantic, a miracle had taken place. A powerless billionaire and a poor boy, two worlds that should never have crossed were brought together by the cry of a child. First class remained silent. Emma slept soundly in Malik's arms, her rosy cheeks resting against his thin shoulder. The passengers who had once whispered and mocked now sat still, many unable to hide their astonishment. Alexander had not taken his eyes off the boy. He, the man who had signed billion-dollar contracts, who had stood on TED stages speaking about the power of artificial intelligence, now felt his throat tighten at the sight of a skinny teenager softly humming a lullaby. He drew a deep breath, his voice low and sincere. "What's your name?" Malik flinched slightly. He lowered his head as if to avoid the stares around him. But then he whispered, Malik Johnson." Alexander gave a slow nod. The name rang out in the first-class cabin like an off-key note, yet heavy with meaning. His gaze fell on Malik's calloused hands, the worn-out shoes. Clearly, this boy did not belong to the world of luxury surrounding him. "Malik, how old are you?" Alexander asked again, his voice gentle, almost a whisper so as not to wake Emma. 15, Malik answered. Several passengers leaned forward to listen. Their eyes shifted suspicion, giving way to curiosity. Alexander studied him longer, as if trying to read an entire life in the boy's eyes. He asked, "And your parents?" Malik swallowed, his hand instinctively tightening around Emma as if to shield his own trembling heart. He hesitated, then said, "My mom works all day at a laundromat. My dad, he's gone. It's just me and my little sister now." A ripple of silence passed through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. A few who had looked down on him earlier now seemed subdued. Alexander nodded slowly, understanding a little more. He asked softly, "Your sister's name?" A spark lit in Malik's eyes as he replied, "Amira, she's 8. She gets sick often, but she's strong. When she cries, I sing to her. She always says as long as she hears me sing, she feels safe." The words fell into the still air, and Malik didn't realize that he had touched hearts all around him. A middle-aged woman who had been scowling since the start of the flight now wiped at her eyes. A hardened businessman who had sat with arms crossed slowly dropped them, gazing at Malik with something different in his eyes. Alexander let out a long breath. He looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully, then back at Malik. A strange mix of shame and admiration swelled within him. He realized that all he had, money, technology, power, had been useless against his daughter's cries. Yet this boy, raised in scarcity, knew exactly how to bring her peace. He asked quietly, "Where are you going on this flight?" "Malik." Malik bit his lip, his voice small. "I'm going to a math competition. My school got me a spot for top students. They raised money to buy me the plane ticket. If I do well, I might get a scholarship." The cabin murmured again. A poor boy, sitting in economy, traveling for a national math competition. It clashed completely with his modest appearance. One passenger shook his head, but no longer in mockery. He muttered, "Maybe this kid really is something special." Alexander stared at Malik. He saw in him the reflection of his own younger self, 20 years ago, when he had nothing but intelligence and the belief that he could change his life. He could not look away. A moment later, Emma stirred slightly. Malik quickly soothed her, singing a few quiet notes, and she drifted back to sleep. The whole cabin exhaled in relief. This time, there were no whispers, only silence, as though everyone respected the fragile miracle before them. Alexander leaned closer. Speaking in a near whisper meant only for the boy you saved this flight, Malik, and you saved Emma's father too. Malik bowed his head. He said nothing, but the shimmer in his eyes said everything. He didn't need applause. All he had done was listen to the cry of a child, something no one else had had the patience or the heart to do. The atmosphere in first class had transformed. What once was tense and suffocating was now covered in a strange calm. A skinny boy, dark-skinned, in worn-out clothes, had somehow become the center of gravity, forcing dozens of people to change the way they looked at the world. Emma slept peacefully in Malik's arms. Each steady breath from her was like a breeze, soothing everyone around. A businessman who had worn his expensive suit like armor and had scowled since the flight began cleared his throat softly, then looked at Malik. "Kid, you're truly brave." "I must apologize for misjudging you earlier." Malik flinched, lowering his head. He wasn't used to praise, much less apologies. A middle-aged woman nearby, the same one who had sneered that he was just a poor boy now, dabbed her eyes with a tissue, then turned to Alexander. "Mr. Wright, to have a boy like this by your daughter's side, I think that's a blessing." Alexander stayed silent. He didn't respond, only studied Malik longer, as if trying to etch every detail of this boy into memory. The flight attendant, the one who had blocked Malik earlier at the boundary between economy and first class now, stepped forward. She bent down and said gently, "Malik, I'm sorry for stopping you. I was only following protocol. But thank you. You saved this entire flight." Malik looked up, his eyes flickering with light for an instant, then lowered them again. He answered with just one quiet sentence, "I only did what anyone could do. If they just listened." Simple words, yet they resonated through the cabin. A few younger passengers exchanged glances, one of them whispering, "This boy, he just taught us a lesson." The mood warmed. An elderly man with silver hair reached out and gently patted Malik's shoulder. "Son, when I was your age, I didn't have the courage to stand up before a crowd. You didn't just soothe a baby tonight. You awakened us, the rich, who sometimes forget how poor we are, in compassion." First class had become something unexpected, a temporary community. Strangers who had been annoyed and divided were now bound together by the presence of a poor boy. They no longer looked at one another with cold detachment, but with quiet understanding. Alexander, who had always lived in his own untouchable world, felt it too. He looked up, scanning the faces around him. It had been years since he had seen humanity so vividly in a cabin usually filled only with power and wealth. He lowered his gaze back to Malik. His voice was hoarse, but this time filled with resolve. "Malik, you've reminded me of something. Sometimes the greatest value isn't in what we build out there, but in how we touch a human heart, here and now." At that moment, many passengers nodded. A few tentative claps rang out. Then, slowly, first classants cold and rigid erupted into sustained applause. Not for a billionaire, not for technology or luxury, but for a poor boy who had dared to stand up, to sing, and to give love. Malik sat there, his head bowed. He didn't smile much, only held Emma a little tighter. But in the shimmer of his eyes, everyone could see it clearly. This boy hadn't just saved a flight. He was stirring hearts that had long been closed. The plane still glided through the night, but first class was no longer the same. It was no longer a place of tension, fatigue, or irritation. Now, it brimmed with a strange, unspoken warmth. Malik sat there, cradling Emma in his arms. He kept humming softly, his eyes half closed, as though he had forgotten the dozens of eyes fixed on him. Alexander watched in silence. In the dim, gentle light, he saw every detail, clearly Emma's tiny hand clutching the worn fabric of Malik's shirt, her head resting in perfect trust on the boy's thin shoulders, though Malik were the only safe place in the world. And in Alexander's heart, something stirred, something he had lost many years ago. Peace. He leaned forward, his voice hoarse yet firm. "Malik, listen to me." Malik looked up. His deep dark eyes flickered with shyness, but also with a strange brightness. Alexander drew in a breath, locking eyes with him. "Do you know what you've done? You didn't just calm Emma. You reminded all of us of something we had forgotten." Malik stayed silent. He was used to being dismissed, not respected. Alexander went on, his voice growing stronger. "I thought that with money and technology, I could control everything. But today, a 15-year-old boy showed me I know nothing about love." He paused, looking down at Malik's rough hands. Then, suddenly, Alexander placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. "Malik, I can't let a boy like you keep struggling alone. You have talent, you have heart, and I want to help you go further." Malik froze. His eyes widened, thinking he must have misheard. What Alexander smiled a rare, warm smile. "I want to sponsor your education, any school you choose, any path you want to follow. I want to make sure a gift like yours isn't buried by poverty." The cabin rippled with shock. Passengers whispered, some even gaped. One gasped under their breath. "My God!" Malik sat in stunned silence, his head dropped, his fingers trembling as they clutched Emma. In his chest, emotions crashed together, disbelief, joy, fear. His voice cracked as he stammered, "But I'm just a poor kid from South Side. I don't deserve that." Alexander shook his head, his eyes resolute. "It's because you're poor, because you've risen above the hardest things, that you deserve it even more. Malik, don't you see people like you are the future?" His voice dropped lower, thick with emotion. "I've lost many things. Malik, my wife, Sarah, is gone. For years, I've lived in glitter and power, but inside, I've been empty. Today, because of you, I remembered life only matters when we give something back." Malik trembled, his eyes brimming. In that moment, he thought of his mother, her cracked hands, working day and night to keep them alive. He thought of Amira, his little sister, always smiling through her fevers. He thought, if I take this chance, she won't have to live in fear anymore. Mom won't have to work herself to the bone. Tears spilled down Malik's face. He bent his head, whispering so softly it was almost only for himself. "Maybe this is the only miracle of my life." Alexander heard him. He tightened his grip on Malik's shoulder, his voice like a vow, not a miracle. "A choice. And I choose to believe in you." First class went silent again. Then a woman began to clap. Another joined. And then the whole cabin erupted in thunderous applause. This time it wasn't tentative. It was recognition, admiration, and support for a poor boy who had stepped forward, and for a powerful man who had chosen to change a life. Malik sat there, his face wet with tears, but his eyes shone bright like fire. In that instant, he knew he was no longer alone. And that flight, what had seemed just a journey across the ocean, had become a turning point. The moment a billionaire rediscovered the meaning of life, and a poor boy found the path to his future. The exam took place in New York. The hall gleamed brightly, the American flag hanging tall and proud. Malik stood before the massive doors, his hand gripping the strap of his frayed backpack. Around him, the other contestants wore crisp suits and shiny watches, their parents laughing and chatting with professors. Malik stood alone, silent. An assistant judge scanned the list and frowned. "Johnson, from South Side." "Are you sure you're qualified?" Alexander stepped forward instantly, his voice firm. "I am sponsoring this boy. He deserves to be here." Malik lowered his head. "But inside a fire lit up, I cannot afford to fail." Inside the hall, contestants sat in numbered rows. Malik was placed at the very back. When the exam papers were handed out, the room fell into absolute silence. On the pages were dense problems filled with complex symbols, so daunting that some contestants broke into a sweat after just reading them. But at the very end was one problem, in bold, the Goldstein problem, an open conjecture left unsolved for 20 years. A contestant whispered in disbelief, "Good God, they're making us face this." "No way." Malik stared at the paper. Fear clawed at him. "I'm not good enough. I'm just a kid from the slums." The pen shook in his hand. At one point, he nearly collapsed, ready to give up. Outside the hall, Emma suddenly began to cry in Alexander's arms. The sound of her crying seemed to pierce straight into Malik's chest. It was as if fate itself was calling him back to that flight the moment he had turned tears into calm. Malik closed his eyes. He whispered, "I soothed Emma. I can do this." The fire inside him roared to life. He began to write. He wrote fast, then slowed, then erased. Sweat ran down his forehead. Time ticked away. Contestants gave up one after another, setting their pens down. But Malik kept going. In his mind flashed the nights studying under streetlights. The times he salvaged used notebooks to keep practicing. Each fragment now returned, fitting together into a complete picture. One senior judge whispered to a colleague, "That boy, he's on the right path." Impossible. This problem no one ever has. When the final bell rang, Malik was the only one still writing. He laid his pen down, breathing hard, his hand aching, but his eyes shone as if he had just climbed a mountain. On results day, the hall was packed. The head judge stepped to the podium, holding the announcement with trembling hands. Ladies and gentlemen, this year we have an unprecedented result. One contestant not only achieved a perfect score, but also solved the Goldstein problem, an open problem unsolved for 20 years. The hall erupted. People leapt to their feet, voices buzzing in disbelief. That contestant is Malik Johnson. His name echoed in thunderous cheers. Malik froze, his whole body stiff, tears welling up as he stepped forward. Each step toward the podium felt impossibly heavy. A silver-haired professor placed the medal around his neck and spoke into the microphone. This is a historic feat. A 15-year-old boy from Southside has achieved what thousands of mathematicians could not. From today, his name will be recorded in the history of American mathematics. Applause exploded. Some professors even wept. Journalists scrambled to capture photos. Alexander, holding Emma, rose to his feet and clapped harder than he ever had in his life. Tears streamed down the face of the man once cold as steel. He didn't just see Malik triumph, he felt himself redeemed. His faith, his compassion, his sense of life itself had been rekindled. He whispered, "Malik, you haven't just changed your life. You've changed mine." The impact was seismic. Immediately after the ceremony, Malik was invited to a special program at Harvard. NASA sent word of future collaboration. His name blazed across the front page of the New York Times, Malik Johnson from Southside, to the mathematical genius who solved the problem of the century. When Malik held the paper, he only smiled faintly, his eyes wet. What filled his mind was not the spotlight, but the image of Amira laughing and his mother cooking a humble dinner. That night, he called home. Malik burst into tears when he heard his mother's trembling voice. "You did it, Malik. I'm so proud of you." And Amira shouted through the phone, "You're my superhero." Malik clutching the phone. Malik sobbed. In that moment, he understood all the hardship, all the humiliation, all the battles within himself had led here. A poor boy had rewritten history. After the award ceremony, the media exploded with coverage. Images of Malik clutching his medal, standing beside Alexander, holding baby Emma, appeared on the front pages of major newspapers. The story aired on national television. Poor boy solves the problem of the century. On social media, millions shared the photo of Malik bowing as he received the award. Comments poured in. "I was poor once, too." This story makes me believe nothing is impossible. This isn't just about mathematics. It's about faith in humanity. The hashtag #OgMalikMiracle spread everywhere. Inside a quiet hotel room, Alexander sat across from Malik. It was late. Emma was asleep in her crib. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but in the room sat only two souls. A 15-year-old boy and a billionaire who had once lost his way. Alexander spoke first, his voice slow and thoughtful. "Malik, you've done something the whole world bows to. But I want to ask you, what do you truly want for yourself?" Malik was silent for a moment. His eyes seemed to drift far away, back to the narrow alleyways, the dim streetlights, his mother's weary face. "I just want my little sister to have a different childhood. I want my mom not to work herself to exhaustion. And if I can, I want other poor kids to have the chance to learn. Like I did." Alexander froze. For the first time, he saw a boy who didn't crave glory for himself, but thought only of others. "You don't want wealth?" he asked. Malik gave a faint smile. "Money is needed to live, but what I really need is a future." Alexander stared at Malik for a long time. The cold light that had once filled his eyes was slowly replaced with warmth, with a faith he thought he had lost. The next day, Alexander held a press conference. Standing before hundreds of reporters, he declared, "I, Alexander Wright, along with the Wright Foundation, will establish a scholarship program called the Malik Johnson Scholarship for students from poverty who have the hunger to rise." Reporters erupted, flashbulbs firing. Malik stood beside him, unable to believe what he was hearing. "This is not charity," Alexander continued firmly. "This is responsibility." Malik reminded me that money only has value when it's used to pave the way for dreams. That line became the headline everywhere. News channels blared, "Billionaire Alexander Wright, transformed after encounter with child prodigy." In Southside, Malik's old neighborhood, crowds gathered around battered TVs to watch the news. Neighbors wept with pride. Children pointed at the screen and shouted, "That's Malik. He made it, Malik's." Mother sat quietly, holding a mirror in her arms, tears streaming down her face even as she smiled. In her heart, there was nothing greater than this pride. A week later, Malik was invited to speak at Harvard University. Before thousands of students and professors, he stood at the podium, microphone trembling in his hand, but his eyes steady. "I am just a boy from Southside, but today I stand here not because I'm the best, but because someone believed in me. One small act like calming a baby on a plane changed my entire life." The hall was silent. This world has many prejudices, many barriers, but sometimes, if just one person gives us a chance, we can change not only our own fate, but society itself. The applause that followed shook the room. Some students cried openly. Alexander, sitting in the audience, lifted his gaze to Malik. In his eyes was a pride he had never even felt for himself. Malik's story spread across major magazines, becoming a global inspiration. Educational organizations reached out. Politicians cited his name in speeches. Every child deserves the chance Malik had. And within that tide, Alexander found his new path. He was no longer just a billionaire making billion-dollar deals, but a symbol of a businessman who turned back to lift his community. On the last night before returning home, Malik sat by the hotel window, staring at the city lights. Alexander walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Malik, you know, I once thought I had lost everything, even faith in myself. But then, because of you, I found myself again." Malik turned and smiled. "No, sir. You gave me a chance too. We just found each other at the right time." In that small room, two people, one rich, one poor, sat together, like two strange puzzle pieces fate had brought to fit. Outside, the city still glittered, but within their hearts, something shone even brighter, the belief that one kind act, one opportunity given, could change the world. The flight back to Southside unfolded in a gentle afternoon. The plane cut through layers of cloud, the sunset painting the sky in hues of crimson. Malik sat by the window, clutching his medal tightly. Beside him, Alexander held Emma, his eyes soft in a way no one had ever seen from the man once known for his coldness. Malik Alexander's voice was low, almost tender. "I once thought I had everything, but today I realize it all means nothing if you don't know how to share it. Thank you for reminding me how to be human." Malik turned to him, his smile genuine. "And thank you, sir. Without you, I would never have had this chance." At that moment, no more words were needed. Between them stretched an invisible bond, unbreakable, something no amount of money could ever buy. When the plane landed, the Southside community was already waiting. Familiar faces, worn by years of hardship, now lit up with joy as they saw Malik step out. Amira rushed forward, throwing her arms around her brother, her eyes sparkling. "I knew you could do it, big brother. Their mother embraced him tightly, her shoulders trembling. "My son, you've turned our dream into reality." Malik buried his face against her shoulder. In that embrace, he felt it clearly. This was the true victory, not the gold medal, not the headlines, but the happiness of family and the faith of his community. Days later, a small ceremony was held at Malik's old school. The yard was packed with children, their eyes shining as they listened to his story. Malik stepped onto the stage, holding the microphone. His voice was simple, humble, just as it had always been. "You know, I once sat where you are. I once thought I'd never escape poverty. But then I learned being poor isn't a crime, and poverty can't stop us from dreaming. If you hold on to faith and perseverance, you can change your life." The schoolyard fell into utter silence. Dozens of young eyes glowed, as if a small flame had been lit inside each heart. From behind, Alexander watched quietly. He saw it clearly. Malik was not just a mathematical prodigy. He was a seed of hope, something this society desperately needed. That evening, in their modest home, Malik sat by the window, gazing at the city lights in the distance. Amira leaned her head on his shoulder. "Brother, one day I want to be like you. I want to do something great too." Malik stroked her hair gently, smiling. "You don't need to be like me. You just need to follow your own dreams. If you believe in yourself, the world will make a path for you." Outside, the wind carried the scent of a new beginning. Months later, Malik officially received his scholarship from the Wright Foundation, but instead of leaving home immediately, he asked to stay a while to teach free math lessons to the neighborhood kids. Alexander asked him, "Aren't you afraid of missing your chance?" Malik shook his head. "The real opportunity is when you can bring others along with you." Alexander fell silent. In that moment, he understood this boy had grown far beyond his 15 years. Years later, Malik's story was still told. People called it the miracle on the fateful flight, not just because a poor boy calmed a billionaire's baby, but because that small moment had sparked a wave of change. Southside was no longer forgotten. Children there grew up believing that dreams were real. Malik continued his academic path, but in his heart, one truth never changed: to give faith and hope to those who needed it most. The story didn't end with applause, nor with glittering glory. It ended in a profound silence, a silence that invited reflection. If a poor boy could change an entire society with one act of kindness, what can each of us do to make this world better? And the answer lies within every human heart. The story of Malik is not just a journey from poverty to glory. It is a powerful reminder that even the smallest act, the simplest choice of courage, can change an entire life, not only your own, but also the lives of those around you. We live in a world filled with barriers, prejudice, poverty, and voices of doubt. But in the midst of hardship, each of us still holds the right to choose to step back and let circumstances dictate our fate, or to move forward and claim our true worth. Malik chose to step forward, and that choice not only brought peace to a crying child on a flight, but also opened the door to his future. The most precious thing here is not the medal, nor the recognition of society. It is faith in oneself, and faith that kindness always carries the power to spread, and we, every one of us, can become a Malik in our own story when we dare to give someone else a chance, a helping hand, a reason to believe. In everyday life, you too may face such choices: to help or to turn away, to be brave or to remain silent, to believe in the good or to give in to despair. Remember this: even the smallest gesture can create a miracle you never expected. Thank you for walking with us through this journey, a journey of tears, of smiles, and of hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to help spread this message of kindness to more people. Because who knows, it might be your act of sharing that plants the seed to change someone's life forever.